Now to make our blackberry mead, I will be using the following. I have 4 pounds of previously frozen blackberries. If you're using fresh blackberries, you might want to rinse them off and go ahead and put them in the freezer, thaw them out, and then use them then. That will help with juice extraction. I'll be using 4 pounds of 100% raw honey. I believe this is clover honey. I'll be using the juice of a quarter of a lemon, which is going to act as our acid blend substitute to add a little acidity and brightness to our mead. This time around, I'm going to be using a Red Star Premier Classic wine yeast. No particular reason. If you don't have wine yeast, this still works. Now we're going to be using about a quarter to half a teaspoon of active dry bread yeast, and that's going to act as a yeast nutrient for our wine yeast. I'm going to be using a couple of straining bags. We'll need at least a gallon of clean filtered water. I'm going to be using an 8-quart pot. I'm going to be using a wide mouth fermenter. If you don't have one of these, you can always use a BPA-free food grade bucket. I'm going to need a 1-gallon jug, carboy, demijohn, take your pick, or in my case, a 4-liter carboy. I'm going to need an airlock with stopper, or a bung. That's a number 6 bung on that airlock. Speaking of airlocks, the primary fermenter that I'm going to be using does have its own built-in airlock. If you don't have one, you're going to need one. It would be helpful, although not essential, to have a hydrometer with testing tube to help us determine what our final alcoholic content is going to be. And it goes not without saying that we need to have at least a food-grade sanitizer to make sure all of our equipment has been properly cleaned and sanitized, whether it's One Step or Star San or some other suitable sanitizer. Just make sure you follow manufacturer's recommended directions. And that's what I'm going to be using to make this mead. Let's go ahead and begin warming up our honey by pouring hot water over the containers. We're going to let that sit for a while. Let's go ahead and get our berries into our straining bags. And let's go ahead and tie this off. All right. No point wasting any decent juice here. And let's get this ready for the stove. Okay, now that we're actually at the stove, let's go ahead and add in about 3/4 of our water. No need to be precise, because we'll probably end up using all of it at some point. Set that aside. And let's go ahead and put our lid back on. And let's bring this up to a boil. All right, now that our water has come up to a boil, we can go ahead and add in our straining bags. In fact, we can turn off the heat. Don't need that anymore. And without making too much of a mess, go ahead and drop in our straining bags. And the reason why we're doing this is simply because, since this channel does not use sulfites, we want a way to kill off any wild yeast that might still be clinging to our berries, and also, to a lesser degree, kill off any germs. We don't really want to cook the fruit, which is why we turned off the heat. So we're just going to go ahead and let this cool a little bit, and then we're going to add in our yeast nutrient substitute. All right, now that I got my bread yeast ready, while it's still nice and piping hot. Actually, it's only been like 2 minutes since I last opened the lid. Go ahead and incorporate our bread yeast with the temperature being more than hot enough to begin killing them off, which is what our desired effect is going to be. Because in order to act as a yeast nutrient, the bread yeast needs to be dead. So while our water is still nice and hot, I want to go ahead and, at this point, might as well, add in our warmed up honey. Now, as I pointed out in the previous video, there's generally a fair amount of honey left over in the container. So we're going to go ahead and see if we can incorporate or extract, liberate, free, take your pick, as much of that honey that we paid for out of the container and into our mead to be. That works pretty well. I'll just go ahead and finish up the rest of these. One last little stir. And let's go ahead and put our lid on. Let's let this come down to room temperature. With our juice mixture down to room temperature, let's go ahead and just mash down in these bags real quick. And let's get ready. Let's go ahead and get our lemon prepped. All we need is just a quarter of a lemon. And let's go ahead and add that to our fermenter. Using a strainer so that we don't get any seeds in there that we don't need. It might cause bitterness during the fermentation process. Want to go ahead and transfer our straining bags, making sure our hands have been cleaned and, if necessary, sanitized. Now you see the need for a wide mouth fermenter. Here we go. Blackberry juice mixture is not in there. And for a moment, let's just go ahead and put our lid back on. For those of you with a hydrometer, now would be a good time to go ahead and take a reading. Also, as I pointed out in a previous video, this is a dedicated wine thief. This has not been used to baste any turkeys. Looks like our hydrometer reading is coming in at 1.120. Now, to begin the process of turning our juice into mead, we of course need to add in our yeast. Again, this was wine yeast, Red Star Premier Blanc, but if you don't have wine yeast, bread yeast does still work. Go ahead and sprinkle that around, trying to avoid the straining bags, and put our lid back on, nice and tight. And once again, I would like to point out that this particular fermenter does have a built-in airlock. If yours doesn't, you're going to need an airlock. It is now time to label our creation so that we know what we're making later on. We are making a Blackberry Mead. We started it on this date, and our original gravity or starting gravity was 1.120. Now we want to keep our Blackberry Mead somewhere where it's nice and cool, preferably dark, for the next several days, and then after about, say, a week or so, we want to go ahead and rack it into our secondary carboy. Reason for that being is that there's going to be a layer of dead yeast or dead yeast building up at the bottom, and we want to go ahead and remove that from on top of that, and also to remove our straining bags. I think the berries have pretty much done their role at that point. Now, this takes care of the initial steps in making this Blackberry Mead, but there are several steps that follow on after this. I have separate standalone videos, which you can find in my winemaking operations playlist on my channel page. So I suggest going over there and having a look and seeing what's truly involved with making this Blackberry Mead. So now then, if you like what you see here, please click on the like and subscribe button, become a member, and also become a patron to help support this channel out. Till then, I'll see you in the next video.